Hi everybody, this is Dan Trottenchek. I'm the Executive Vice President with the North American Retail Hardware Association and publisher of Hardware Retailing Magazine. I'd like to thank you for taking some time to watch this video where we're going to discuss some of the things that are going on with the independent home improvement retail market. And if you are a vendor serving that market, a distributor serving that market, or anyone just with an interest into the market, we sincerely appreciate you taking a look at the video today. As the North American Retail Hardware Association, it is really our goal to help independent hardware stores, home centers, and lumber yards, regardless of their wholesale affiliation, prosper and succeed. And so we are always heartened when vendors and distributors and service providers want to learn more about what's going on with independent retailers and what some of the challenges and opportunities they face to their success exactly are. So without any further ado, I'd like to take you through some of the slides this afternoon and talk to you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about over the next 15 minutes or so. First off, we're going to look at last year's performance at the 2016 home improvement industry, and we're going to look at independent retailers within that industry and kind of talk about how they did, but also look at what their outlook is for growth. Next up, we're going to look at some research that NRHA has conducted that talk a little bit about some of the growth opportunities for independent home improvement retailers, some of the challenges they face, and some of the areas where they feel they may invest in their operations for growth. Lastly, we're going to take a look at some additional research where we talk to independent home improvement retailers and ask them about their thoughts on their current relationships with the manufacturers that are serving the retail segment of the market. So first off, let's take a look at the overall market size for the home improvement industry in the United States. According to NRHA's estimates, we put the 2016 market size at about $358.2 billion. And that includes all sales that are flowing through retail. That also includes big box sales as well as independent sales. That marked about a 5.8% year-over-year growth from 2015 to 2016. And we look at our projections moving further out from 2015 through 2020, we are tracking the industry still posting strong growth at about 4.5%. For those of you who watch the retail industry as a whole, you'll know that home improvement is actually setting the bar in the retail industry and is really outperforming other retail segments. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and we might talk about that in future editions of data presentations like this. When we talk about our size of the market, I always like to point out what other organizations, where they are pegging the size of the market. So this next chart looks at where the U.S. Census Bureau is putting their size of market. And for 2016, they had it about $352.4 billion. And if you look at their growth, they had a little bit stronger 2015 to 2016 at about 6.7%. In the fourth quarter of 2016, that slowed a little bit, so it softened a little bit, but they were still tracking in the high sixes for the year. And then when you look at the compound annual growth that they had posted for the industry from 2011 through 2015, they had the industry growing at about 5.4%. The last item we are going to look for when we're looking at the size of the industry is from our friends at the Home Improvement Research Institute, who also looks at the size of market for home improvement retailing. And they posted 2015 to 2016 growth at about 6%, with a little bit stronger growth coming from the pro segment of the market at about 6.1 versus the consumer segment of the market. And when you look at their forward-looking predictions, they have the market growing at about 3.9% through 2020, and then they pegged it at about 5.2% growth from 2011 to 2015. So one of the questions I commonly get when we look at these different market sizes are, why do the three different entities kind of have different market size estimations and different growth predictions? And a lot of that boils down to simply the fact that we look at things just slightly differently. And we cover a lot of our methodology at NRHA in our annual market measure report, which appears in the December issue of Hardware Retailing Magazine. So if you're curious at how we arrive at our market size estimates and growth estimates, I would encourage you to look at that issue and where we get a little bit more into our specific methodology. So with that being the size of the market, and obviously all three of the entities have shown growth for the home improvement retailing segment, and we are predicting growth moving forward for the home improvement retailing segment, particularly on the independent side of the market. We also conducted some research where through NRHA we reached out to about 1,500 independent home improvement retailers, and we asked them for their specific opinions on how they felt their operations were going to look currently and moving into the future. And these next set of slides give us some insight into that. First of all, when we asked them toward the end of last year, we asked them how sales had performed year to date in 2016 versus 2015. And what we found there was that 45% had said that they were posting moderate increases in sales. 10% said that they were seeing significant increases in sales year over year. And while this 55% was certainly encouraging to see the number of retailers reporting increase in sales, when you compared those numbers to what we saw in 2015, it was a slightly slower pace. There were certainly some reasons for that were weather related in 2016. Depending on what areas of the country you looked at, there were certainly some weather challenges that independent retailers were facing. So I would say that the growth rates were certainly different regionally. You could talk to someone running a business in one part of the country that was seeing double-digit growth, while growth was flat in other areas of the country that were more affected by weather and other kind of economical anomalies or economic trends like slowdown in oil production or increase and decrease in other commodity pricing. Home centers, if you remember the chart we looked at from our friends at NRHA, where it showed that pro sales were growing at a slightly faster pace, it would stand to reason that our home centers, which represent a little bit more of their sales coming from lumber, building materials, and building supplies, were reporting stronger growth toward the end of 2016 year over year, with 69% reporting some kind of growth year over year. So at the end of the year, we asked retailers to kind of put on their predictive hats, and this was encouraging as well. 71% of all the retailers we talked to said that they felt that 2017 was going to represent growth over 2016. Again, home centers were really kind of leading the pack in this regards, with 77% of our home centers saying that they saw growth, and lumber dealers were a bit more conservative at 57%. Some of the reasoning behind that is lumber dealers have really been slower to recover coming out of the recessionary periods, and I think that they are now a little bit more cautious when they begin predicting growth cycles. Next, we asked retailers to look a little bit longer, take a little longer view of what they saw sales happening in the market. We said over the next 3 years, how do you predict sales to perform? And again, 78% of retailers, which includes home centers, lumber yards, and hardware stores, said that they felt they would experience sales growth in the next 1 to 3 years, which again, given the growth that the industry has experienced, is certainly a positive for the industry on the independent segment. Here there's a little bit of a switch. Instead of seeing the home centers sharing the most optimism, we saw the greatest degree of optimism coming from hardware stores, where 81% predicted longer term growth. And lumber dealers were very positive, but a little bit more reserved than the rest of the group, with only 67% predicting growth over the 1 to 3 year cycle. So across the board, pretty much for independent retailers, they feel that there is going to be growth this year and in the near future over the next 1 to 3 years. So we asked retailers to tell us where they saw those opportunities for growth coming from. What's interesting when we look at these numbers is we asked, what are all the areas where you see that growth will be fueling the business? And what all of retailers pretty much across the board said is that they really see opportunity to grow within their existing operations. Nearly 1/4 said that they really feel that they can drive growth by adding new niches and new products to their current assortments, which should certainly be encouraging to the manufacturers in the marketplace, that retailers are really looking to drive this growth by finding new ways to add new products or new product areas to grow their existing operations. We also see adding a new location coming up as a factor for growth. Certainly, it's encouraging to see retailers on the independent side once again thinking about growing beyond just their existing number of locations to adding new locations. 14% identified enhancing operational efficiencies as a way to drive growth, getting products to market quicker, being sharper with pricing, looking at new opportunities for moving products into the market, whether that be employee training or selling skills. Also, about the same number feel that they can really drive growth by developing a stronger team and then again improved marketing of their existing operation. Larger operators, which may or may not be a surprise to a lot of you, were more likely to say adding a new location was going to fuel their growth. And this is something that I want to spend just a second on because I think it's important to note is that one of the challenges facing the independent operators in this industry isn't necessarily the opportunity to grow their business, but the financial wherewithal to expand their operations, which right now we have seen a pattern developing where retailers that have multiple locations can much more easily add to their store counts than retailers moving from one store to two stores. So if there are certainly opportunities that need support from the manufacturing and distribution community, would be helping retailers of all sizes find ways to expand their operation from one store to two, from two to three, and so on. Home centers, again, because they're coming out of a market that's been very beneficial to their type of format, were very encouraged in looking at adding a new location actually as their top way to grow, with 18% saying that adding a new location was going to present a significant growth opportunity, while lumber dealers really feel that they may be a little bit behind the curve where it comes to developing a stronger team, and see that almost 1 in 4 lumber yards feel that if they can develop a stronger team, a lot of that is through outside sales and contractor sales, they can find ways to grow their operation. So, on the other side of the equation, for every opportunity for growth, there are certainly challenges that these retailers, the independent home improvement retailers, face. And these are particularly important for everyone, both on the retail side, but for those of us that support the independent retail community, to understand what these challenges are, because it can really become a community effort. If your business has a vested interest in a strong and growing independent home improvement retailing community, anything you can do to help retailers overcome these challenges will certainly feed to the success of those retailers and the overall success of the industry. So let's take a look at what they feel some of those challenges are. When asked what the single biggest challenge they felt they faced to growing their business, overwhelmingly, they said that they feel it is finding the right employees. And this is a big challenge for a number of reasons. One is that independent home improvement retailers often differentiate their operations by the customer service and product knowledge they provide. The ability to provide that is directly driven by the quality of employees they have. It is a point of difference for independent retailers. Equally important is something we just talked about, which is the ability to grow their businesses by adding new locations, adding new departments, adding new niches. All of these things require a good, solid, well-trained employee base to be able to do. You can't grow to a second store or a third store or a fourth store without having qualified personnel in place to run those operations. Equally, you can't add a rental niche or a barbecue niche or another niche that can drive your business without having the right personnel on staff to drive those niches and be accountable for the profitability of those niches. So this is definitely something that NRHA is kind of pointing its resources toward, is helping retailers come up with, develop, and keep highly trained individuals. And anything you could do as someone who is a supporter of the industry to work along these lines could also help this independent segment of the market grow. Next up, which is kind of an ever-present challenge for any business, is competition from brick and mortar retailers. I would hazard a guess that if we would have conducted this survey, say 10 years ago, while the big boxes were kind of in their growth cycle, that more independent businesses probably would have identified this increasing brick and mortar competition as a bigger threat to their ability to grow. But now, because Home Depot, Lowe's, and Menards have been relatively stagnant in their growth patterns, it has kind of moved down the list. And when we asked this question of retailers to explain to us longer term what they see as challenges to growth, brick and mortar really didn't begin to ratchet back up again. The one thing that did begin to take a more prominent presence as we looked at the longer term challenges to growth was online competition. While most independent home improvement retailers aren't identifying online competition as a primary inhibitor to growth right now, when we start looking again at that longer view, first 1 to 3 years and then 5 to 7 years, online competition continues to get more and more on the radar for independent home improvement retailers. Something that we saw appear this year that was not appearing in our 2015 study where we did this research was regulations and taxes. Small business owners are certainly feeling this and have felt this over the last couple of years, and home improvement retail operations that are independent are small businesses. And regulations and taxes and the challenges posed by that, they do view as an inhibitor to growth. It was kind of difficult in this research, and we'll see how this plays out when we move into the research later in 2017. There is a certain factor you have to take into account that we were going through an election cycle when a lot of this research was fielded, so the kind of ever-present messaging at that point about regulations and taxes certainly could have had a impact on the way our respondents answered that question. It is interesting to note that we looked at all this data by size of store and store type, and regardless of type or size, all the respondents were pretty much roughly in line with what they said were their biggest challenges to growth. 2016 to 2015, it's important to note that the challenge of finding the right employees actually increased in prominence across the board, coming from 29% in 2015 to 33% in 2016. And as we move forward in the independent home improvement channel, this is going to become more and more of an issue because the average age of the independent home improvement retailer is rapidly getting closer and closer to that retirement mark. And so finding the right people to take over the business and to lead the next generation of the business is going to be an increasing concern. Let's talk a little bit about what areas of the business retailers are investing in. It's kind of interesting, and it's probably good that we set the stage with where they feel their challenges and opportunities are, because when we asked retailers about the areas they're investing, you'll definitely see there's a correlation to how they are making investments on both the opportunity side and on the side to overcome challenges. So the first thing we asked was, are you planning on making any major business improvement or capital improvement projects in the next 1 to 3 years? And the vast majority said that, well, it depends. I'm either planning on doing it or it depends on how my business performs. But overall, there certainly does seem to be more of a tendency to say we want to invest in our business than not invest in our business. Once again, coming off of strong performance years, home centers were most likely to say yes. Almost 60% of home centers said that they were looking at finding ways to invest in their business, which should be encouraging. And lumber dealers were again kind of bringing up the rear, mostly because a little bit of that kind of residue of shell shock coming out of the recessionary years and a little bit more cautious approach to business and growth. Let's move on for a second and talk about independent retailers and their thoughts on manufacturers. First off, we asked independent retailers to rate, overall, how would you rate the industry's manufacturers in supporting your business? And one of the things that is interesting to note is that overall, there is certainly, for those of you who may feel that we just get beat up all the time by independent retailers, overall, independent retailers feel that manufacturers are doing a pretty solid job of supporting their businesses. And you can certainly see by these charts there's a certain degree of consistency that they feel retailers are being supported, either good or very good. It's kind of good to report that the number of excellent responses doubled. It was only 1 percentage point, but it did double year over year. One thing that was certainly kind of interesting to ask is we asked retailers over the last 2 years, if you had to say which single factor is the most important to you with dealing with industry's manufacturers, service, price, or selection, service certainly seems to be increasing in importance. 51% listed service as the most important factor when choosing which manufacturers to do business with, and that was a pretty steep increase over the previous year's result of 38%. And price was actually the area that went down the most year over year. And those of you who are probably shaking your head saying, well, retailers always seem to want to talk about price, I think that part of that is not necessarily that price is not important to retailers, but I think it is more along the lines of good competitive prices that are going to earn us good margins are kind of the cost of entry. It's kind of what we expect from the manufacturers we do business with. So the way manufacturers can differentiate themselves is with the service that they provide. Lastly, we asked independent retailers, if you could tell industry manufacturers one thing that would help them better serve you, what would it be? And a lot of it was around having access to the information they need, and things like making sure your packaging is good quality. And we heard time and again, which relates back to the first bullet point, was on the quality of reps. What we kind of learned was that there's a pretty big gap between the rep agencies and the individual reps who retailers think are really doing a good job of helping them grow their business, and then the other side where the reps really aren't very involved or seeming very concerned about how they can help the retailers grow their business. So when they're talking about service, a lot of that directly relates back to the information that manufacturers are providing to the retailers, and the fact that their service and rep organizations are really focusing on how they can help. Another point that I just want to talk about for a second is this last bullet point about don't forget the power of the independent. And I think it's important to point out when we look at the overall size of the market to understand that roughly half of all sales flowing through flowing through the home improvement retailer market are going through independent home improvement retailers. And oftentimes independent retailers feel like manufacturers specifically, as well as other service providers, perhaps don't recognize the buying power as a group they represent. So it's just important to keep that in mind when you're going to market and when you're having discussions with independent retailers. On the other side, we asked what were the greatest frustrations that independent retailers felt with dealing with manufacturers. And certainly the last point goes into the first point over here, which is the feeling that perhaps sometimes big boxes get some advantages that the independent retailers don't get. There's some frustration on the ability to call a company or deal with a company and really get to the answers they need. A lack of support to independent retailers, which a lot of that goes back to communication and the rep network. Also the concept of sometimes opening order points are too high, and really the concept of standing behind the products with just the good old-fashioned quality that retailers need. Again, in talking to retailers and looking at more of the responses from the data, so many independent retailers feel that the quality of the products that they move through their store, consumers and pros definitely relate the quality of those products back to the retailer they buy them from. And if they only have access to products that they are not happy with the quality of, it's going to go beyond the point of the retailer feeling like the manufacturer brand takes a hit and the retailer feeling like their own brand is taking a hit for selling subpar quality products. The last thing, and probably one of the most important things that we asked, is what are the 3 things industry manufacturers could do to earn your business as an independent retailer? By far the most frequently mentioned one was offer unique products for independent retailers. Something that a a consumer or pro might not be able to find outside the independent channel. They'd like to see a level playing field, fair pricing across the big box channel on the online channel. So just that they have an even playing field to be able to move your products to market. And also communicating well and standing behind your products. During our State of Independence conference, which we hold every December in Chicago, where we share this data and a whole lot more like it, we held retail panel discussions, and the independent retailers that served on the panel drove home the point that communications and being open to communicating with independent retailers and providing quality access to information to independent retailers was so important in forging a relationship, a strong, loyal relationship with manufacturers, that certainly cannot be understated. We asked independent retailers where they like to get their information about new products, and those wholesaler markets that certainly can take a lot of resources for you to be at. A very strong performer when it comes to how and where retailers get access to product information. I certainly like to see this as the publisher of Hardware Retailing, but trade magazine ads and trade magazine articles, also very important ways that retailers, independent retailers, get access to information about new products. I can't tell you how many times we have retailers reach out to us that say, I found a product in your magazine, and if you want more statistics on this, I'd encourage you to go to the hardwareretailing.com website, download our media kit and our readership study, which show specifically some feedback from independent retailers on how frequently they look at the ads in the magazine and how frequently they find products in our magazine that they haven't seen elsewhere. With that, I'd like to thank you once again for your interest in how you can better serve the independent home improvement market. I would encourage you that if you want more information like this, to please take a look at your calendars and look for information about our State of Independence conference, which will once again be occurring in December of 2017 at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare in Chicago. And we'd love to have you come and learn more about this and listen to some of the retailer panels and get retailer feedback. And I would encourage you to take a look at Hardware Retailing Magazine, and anything NRHA can help you to do, we'd be happy to help you. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Again, I'm Dan Trottenchek with NRHA and Hardware Retailing. Thank you so much for your time today.